And there is actually a worksheet because the kids are staying in church today. There is a worksheet for the children to work through. See if you can fill in all the answers. By the end of the sermon, you'll all be so much wiser. So, while the rest of us have had a little break, Ed's been busy working on a sermon. He's been reflecting, talking to God, and preparing for today. So, Lord, I thank you for Ed and for his willingness to get stuck in, that he consistently is consistent and he keeps going. And I just pray that for today, as he's kept on going and he's sought you, that the word opens to us, your word opens to us afresh, that Ed is able to powerfully deliver what you have for us today. Please use him and move through him into us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Good morning. Happy New Year. How are we doing? How was the Christmas break? Fabulous. I heard some great things happened at Mike and Mel's over at Matoli Bay. Sorry? Kayo. We'll go for Kayo. Last week, which was awesome. We'd have a really lovely time while we were away down in Raglan. It was special. We saw lots of really great friends, had a really good time. But it is also really lovely to be back home, to be back with you guys, and to be turning to the Word for the first time in 2026. And as we begin today, I'm going to ask the question that doubtless at some point or other, and maybe many times in our lives, we will find ourselves asking, what's the point? It's the question we ask when we don't get what we hoped we would. It's the question when we do get what we hoped we would, only to find that what it wasn't what we thought it would be. It's the question we ask when we are underwhelmed at the outcomes, and it's the question we ask when we are overwhelmed at the obstacles. It's the question in the minds of children and their teachers when a classroom is just full of a room of blank, puzzled faces. It's the question a young person asks in the confusion around career choices. It's the question an old person asks at the end of decades of faithful toil. It's the question we ask when everything is falling apart and we're left with the pieces of a fragmented life. It's the question from the successful but dissatisfied, and it's the question from the unsuccessful and despairing. It's the question from the richest and the poorest, the sickest and the healthiest. And it's also a great question to ask at the start of a new year, what's the point? The plan for the next couple of weeks, we've got, just so you know, I'm preaching today. Pastor Maz is going to be preaching next week. Then we've got the wonderful Pete and Nanette coming up from Raglan, and Pete and Nanette run Chaplaincy New Zealand. They're going to be preaching here in 2 weeks' time. And then Pastor Sean will be back with us at the end of the month and preaching again. But in these 2 weeks, we're going to be covering the book of Haggai. 2 weeks, 2 chapters, what could be simpler? We thought that rather than doing what we often do at summer, where we kind of not wing it, but it's a bit of a free-for-all. We go to God and we get our own individual words. We thought, why not cover a book that we often don't pay too much attention to? One that doesn't get a lot of airtime. One that is 2 chapters. And Haggai raised its hand. So we're going to go to Haggai with the question in our minds, what's the point? Haggai chapter 1. In the 2nd year of King Darius, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest. This is what the Lord Almighty says. These people say the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. And then the word of the Lord came through the prophet Haggai. Is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your panelled houses while this house remains a ruin? Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much but harvested little. You eat but never have enough. You drink but never have your fill. You put on clothes but are not warm. You earn wages only to put them in a purse with holes in it. Now this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. Go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house, so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored, says the Lord. You expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home I blew away. Why? Declares the Lord Almighty. Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. Therefore, because of you, the heavens have withheld their dew and the earth its crops. I called for a drought on the fields and the mountains, on the grain, the new wine, the olive oil, and everything else the ground produces, on people and livestock, and on all the labor of your hands. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and the whole remnant of the people obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. Then Haggai, the Lord's messenger, gave this message of the Lord to the people. I am with you, declares the Lord. So the Lord stirred up the spirit of Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and the spirit of Joshua, son of Jozadak, the high priest, and the spirit of the whole remnant of the people. They came and began to work on the house of the Lord Almighty their God on the 24th day of the 6th month. What's the point? Haggai's got some answers. And just as a disclaimer, and Marion and I, we've been talking about this for much of the last week, even while we were on holiday. Haggai's one of those books you kind of got to be really careful how you deliver as a pastor, because it's really easy to use for a church building agenda. My chapter 1 subtitle here says, A Call to Build the House of the Lord. And I really want to make it clear that as we start our journey through Haggai, this is not a church recruitment scheme. And I'm not trying to guilt you into jumping on teams. Hey, all good things to do. Maybe not the guilt, but the jumping on teams bit. That's not the point of Haggai. Before we get to the point of Haggai, it's important to do some background work. Haggai is one of those books that you could read it on its own, but it comes to life when you realize that it was written at the same time as 3 other books. Haggai was written at the same time as Ezra and Nehemiah and Zechariah. Ezra and Nehemiah tell the stories of a community rebuilding. Ezra tells the story of the community in Judah rebuilding its temple. Nehemiah tells the story of a community rebuilding its city wall. So they are the what that happened. Haggai and Zechariah are the spiritual foundation that leads to it. And actually, a lot of what happens in Ezra, in the book of Ezra, is because Haggai happens. But we actually don't know too much about Haggai himself. You find out a little bit about some of the other prophets, and Haggai is what's called a minor prophet. But we don't really know a huge amount about him. We know that he's a prophet. In Ezra, we discover that he's a preacher, that he worked with Zechariah. So they were a dynamic duo. And that you can deduce that he was recognized by the spiritual and political leaders of the time as someone who was sent by God. And that's about all we've got when it comes to who Haggai is. Haggai is 2 chapters, and it is 4 main messages. 3 of them are addressed to the people, but through 2 people in particular. They are Zerubbabel, a governor, and Joshua, a high priest. That's important. Zerubbabel is the governor of the remnant in Judah. His role is kind of administrative political leadership. He's put in that position by King Darius, and his role is kind of a governance role, making sure things run according to the will and the rule of the Persian Empire, who are currently ruling the land at the time. Joshua is the high priest. Now, his role is kind of spiritual direction, preaching and teaching, but also decisions on matters of justice and religious duties. Between them, they represent church and state. And that's really, really important. If you could stop here and do a message on that. I mean, we are a society that grapples with and wrestles with whether church and state should mix. Often, our society is trying to pull the two apart. Haggai doesn't give that option. Church and state are addressed together because he's not going to compartmentalize this. And actually, I think it's a bit like Newton's law of gravity. Like you may try, but we can't. You can try and separate church and state. You may try and separate spiritual and secular, but it simply isn't possible. There's no such thing as a spiritual matter that just affects your spiritual life. Spiritual direction carries practical consequences. And actually one of the really good things that happened while I was away is I was having a chat at my friend Andy's house, and I asked him, "Are you healthy?" And he asked, "How do you mean? Physically or spiritually?" I said, "Both." And we shared notes on how healthy we'd been over the last year and how things had gone. And I realized as I shared how healthy or unhealthy I'd been over the last little while, actually my physical health isn't just in its own box. It overflows. It impacts everything. My physical health impacts my family health, impacts my emotional health and my mental health, impacts my health as a pastor and my ability to minister effectively. So if we were to stop just there at who Haggai is addressed to, you discover that God is interested in the whole, not just in the compartment of your spiritual life. Because to God, there is no such thing as just your spiritual life. He's interested in your life. It is not a series of little boxes with my spiritual life, my mental life, my social life, my hobby life, my work life. It's your life. God addresses church and state together. Background done. What's the point of Haggai? Well, to start, when God speaks, he doesn't speak with anger, and he doesn't speak with judgment. He gives a people's perspective. And he says, these people say, the time has not yet come to rebuild the Lord's house. Who are these people? You know how you can sometimes say the same thing and it can mean about 6 different things depending on how you say it. Yeah, I can get that for you, or I'll get that for you. Suddenly, the dynamic in the relationship is very different. These people. Who are these people? This is where it helps to read Ezra or Nehemiah and Zechariah. In Ezra chapter 3, we start to build a profile of these people. Who are these people we're talking about? Because on face value, these people, to me, sounds a little bit like they might be a bit obstinate, indignant, defiant, or lazy. They might have an attitude problem, these people. But if you read Ezra, you discover that quite the opposite is the case, at least at first. In Ezra chapter 3, verse 3, we're told that despite their fear of the peoples around them, they built the altar on its foundation and sacrificed burnt offerings on it to the Lord, both the morning and evening sacrifices. These aren't lazy people. These are brave people. These are people who were scared. They're the remnant of some exiled people with enemies who could overpower them at any time. They're vulnerable. They're fragile. But they've got the bravery to stare their fear in the face and get on with the job anyway. They're committed to rebuilding. The problem is, and you read this in Ezra 4, we won't go to it today, but a conspiracy rises up. A conspiracy of their enemies to try and stop the work. And what the enemies succeed in doing is making the king, Artaxerxes, pass a law forcing them to stop the work. I don't think it's their fault that they stopped building the temple. They were forced by the superpower of the time to stop what they were doing. But when Haggai comes along, 16 years have passed. A new king's on the throne, and the temple is still unbuilt. What do you do when you can't do what you should? I'll get a drink. Well, I think you do what you can, can't you? That to me makes sense. I'm an athlete, and one of the recurring injuries that I struggle with is back injuries that come up from time to time. And I quickly learned when I got my first injury or two that there's been this kind of like transition in the way that physios have approached dealing with back injuries. My mum had the same thing, and often when she would get back injuries, she would be prescribed rest. But now they prescribe movement. Because when you get a back injury and you stop, yeah, you're resting, but you also find that you stiffen up and the movement stops, and it's really hard to get going again. They prescribe movement. You do the thing that you can do. Find the movement that you can achieve. Retain some strength. Build the muscle back up and start to aid your recovery, not by staying still, but by achieving the movements that you can achieve, rather than stopping because of the things you can't. I sympathize with the remnant. They've done what they could. They were forced to stop. So they rebuilt their own. And besides, I mean, why should it be that much of a big deal to God if they've not rebuilt the temple? Because if you read Isaiah 66, and particularly 2 Samuel verse 7, you realize that I don't think the temple is as big a deal as we seem to be reading about. 2 Samuel 7, I have not dwelt in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with a tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all the Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel, why have you not built a mere house of cedar? It's not the temple that's the big issue in Haggai. Because, and places like Amos talk about this as well, you can get religion right and miss the point. The point in Haggai is in chapter 1, verse 8, which says, go up into the mountains and bring down timber and build my house so that I may take pleasure in it and be honored. The point of Haggai is God's pleasure, God's worship, God's honor. And the problem Haggai has to deal with, we were chatting about this in the car, that I think this is a journey through misplaced faith, hope, and love. Because they were brave people, rebuilding in spite of their fear, but they were forced to stop. Now they're in the place where they're not forced to stop anymore, but they still are. It started as the enemy happening to them. But sometimes, how many do you know, if something happens to you, eventually it can start to get into you. And you become the victim. You were never meant to become the victim. They've become an enemy to themselves. I think they've lost their love. Where it says that, is it a time for you yourselves to be living in your panelled houses? Some translations use luxurious, lavish. Another word that's possibly better used for panelled is finished. They've taken care of their own. They've finished their own places. And the trouble with this, and you have to try and picture the scene, is that in a city that's in ruins, you've got all these houses that are now rebuilt and finished and populated over the period of 16 years. But the temple is still a pile of ruins. And it will be this perpetual eyesore. And it's not just the temple. God's not on an ego trip for a building. It's everything that the temple represents. God is an afterthought. One of my big challenges in 2025 was how to deal with dwindling energy levels. Like many people, I got tired. When I get tired, I don't stop functioning, but I do fade. You know, like in the Lord of the Rings, you know, I feel like butter spread over too much bread. And I keep doing the jobs, but I'm just not quite as effective as I was the week before. And then next week, I'm not quite as effective again. And I'm just a little bit worn, and a bit more worn. And I fade a little bit more. And as I fade, I enter autopilot mode. Marion calls it robot. And in robot mode, I'm still doing everything, but my face stops feeling it. And I'm doing everything, and I said to Marion, it's really hard when I'm really tired. It's really hard to do the things I'm doing with any feeling. So I'll still do them, but my face won't know it. And the trouble with that is that especially when it comes to my relationship with God, is that I find myself focusing on the things I'm doing for Him than the love I have for Him. And I succeed in compartmentalizing something that's never meant to be compartmentalized. The love you have for God and the things you do for God are never meant to be separate things. And as a result of that, I become a bit like the Ephesian church in Revelation 2. You've lost your first love. What happened? You know, the CEV translation says, you don't have as much love as you did, as you used to. And God becomes my afterthought. Still doing everything, but I've faded. Where is God an afterthought? Where have we misplaced our love? The people in Haggai have misplaced their hope. Even by their own metrics of success, they've missed the point. In verse 6, 5, 6, and again in verse 9, God says, give careful thought to your ways. You've planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but are not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. In verse 9, you expected much, but see, it turned out to be little. What you brought home, I blew away. Why? Because of my house, which remains a ruin, while each of you is busy with your own house. The remnant have achieved a lot. They've achieved food and drink and clothes and shelter and wages. What they haven't achieved is satisfaction for hunger, thirst, warmth, or financial security. When God is an afterthought, when we misplace our love, everything we might hope for will be unsatisfying, even if it's achieved. And because they've misplaced their love and they've misplaced their hope, they've misplaced their faith. They've not trusted in a God who provides. Bearing in mind that they would know things like, Psalm 50 verse 10, that every wild animal of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. The earth is the Lord's, Psalm 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it. The power of provision is not a problem for God. And they should know that. But they've become their own self-preservation society. And God confronts that. And He challenges that. And in verse 12, we're told that when Zerubbabel and Joshua and the whole remnant of the people heard this, they obeyed the voice of the Lord their God and the message of the prophet Haggai, because the Lord their God had sent him, and the people feared the Lord. They're confronted. They don't moan. They don't retaliate. They don't offer excuses. They change. They change their fear stance. In the word for fear in Ezra chapter 3, when they talk about the fear of the peoples around them, that is a word that is defined as related with terror and dread. When it says that the people feared the Lord, that is a word that is associated with honor and respect and awe. They have changed their fear. What once was a thing that terrified them, now they are wrapped up in fear of something else. What was once being scared of the outcome is now sheer respect for the one who's speaking and a need to take him seriously. How many of us need to change what it is and how it is we are fearing? Towards the end of last year, our landlords came to us and said that we needed to move house. They were going to sell their place. And there is a part of us that thinks, where are we going to live? The fear of the unknown. But the power of provision is not a problem with God. Are we in fear and terror and dread? Or are we in respect and reverence and awe? It cannot be both. One will win. A lot of commentators say that Haggai is 2 chapters and 4 messages. I actually kind of think it's 4 plus 1. Because something happens when the remnant change. And it's really interesting, the order of how things happen here. And the dates. This is why I've come to this place of now, I like looking at the stats and the dates and the calendar of things. The order of things in verses 12 to 15. The people obey God. The people fear God. The people are stirred up. And then they start building. 23 days after Haggai talks. There is a 3 and a bit week period of changing but not acting. And God isn't speaking once they start doing things. He speaks in the in-between space. And he says 4 words. I am with you. What is the point of Haggai? It's that we worship and honor and bring pleasure to God, and that he enters our lives and says, I am with you. What's the point? I think the point of Haggai is like so many of the minor prophets who don't get a lot of very good airtime, is that the point is greater than anything our global currencies for success could suggest. If we are guided by society's currency of success and stability and security and significance, we will miss the point. I don't want to. I don't want to miss the point. I don't want to find out that I've made a big deal out of small things and a small deal out of big things. I don't want to find out that I stand before God and I say, God, here's my life, and realize that we were on different pages. That the things that really mattered to me actually weren't that important. That I got my priorities way out of whack. I don't want to. Like stroppy teacher, I don't want to. I want to find out that I made a big deal out of the big things. That I heard God's heart, and that's what I was all about. That I was on his page. That his priorities were mine. Then I would have gotten the point. How are we going to get the point? Always pay attention to the things that repeat in any passage in the Bible. In Haggai chapter 1, there is an instruction that repeats twice. Give careful thought to your ways. The first time, it's looking back. And this is why I think Haggai is a great book to read at the start of a year. Because we're doing both. We're looking back at the year that's gone, and sometimes we're thinking, oh man, I'm glad it's over, or man, that was awesome, or whatever it is. And then most of us are usually looking, 2026, like what could happen this year? The first time God says, give careful thought to your ways, it's looking back at what happened and the things that did go wrong. The second time, it's a looking forward thing. One of the most powerful things I think we can do, and we did that a little bit when Marion was transitioning us from singing to this, was spending time in silence and waiting. Because in the silence, which I think in our, certainly Western world in the 21st century, we don't get a lot of, God can comfort the uncomfortable, and he can awkwardly nudge you when you're a bit complacent. The silence is golden. I've got a little bit more to say, not a lot. And I'm going to ask the Heather and the team to jump up, and we will sing. But before I finish, we'll just take another minute where we won't say anything. It will be a time of silence. And all I'm going to ask you to do is what God asks us to do in verses 5 and 7. Give careful thought to your ways. Think back on the year that you've had. And think ahead of the year ahead. And is there a part of something in our reflecting back or our reflecting forward that may need a reset? Just take 60 seconds. I'll watch the clock. At the start of a new year, where are the things that we've been compartmentalizing, putting in nice little boxes, when actually God really wants to address the whole? I think Haggai's asking, have we misplaced our love? Have there been times where we've treated God as an afterthought rather than the main event? Have we misplaced our hope and actually been dissatisfied, not just for not getting what we thought we wanted, but actually we did get what we wanted, but actually it's just not what it was cracked up to be? Have we misplaced our faith and become our own self-preservation society? Have we forgotten that actually God longs to say, I am with you? Have we gotten scared of possible outcomes? When any fear that we may have is supposed to be simply awe and reverence of the one who really is at the center of it all. as we sing, the only thing that really that comes to mind for what happens from here is that, maybe this is a God thing, who knows, that this is now a reset station. This area at the front where we often invite people to come forward for ministry, for prayer, this is a reset station. If in the time that we have been giving careful thought to our ways, God has brought to attention that actually there are some areas where we have misplaced faith, hope, or love, where we've compartmentalized and put things away where actually it needs to be brought out and God needs to be able to speak to the whole of you. If we realize that actually fear, wrong fear, has been guiding steps, then come forward. Pastor Marion, I'll ask Pastor Pam to come forward as well. And this will just be a reset station. But let's not start this year without doing important business with God. I'll ask Heather and the team. They'll lead us.